Croeso, welcome. My name is Sarah Jenkins. I'm an academic at Cardiff University, and I'm delighted to be chairing the first session from ExChange Wales in a series based on strengths-based approaches to adult social care. Just to tell, for those of you that don't know a little bit about ExChange Wales, the centre brings together leading researchers with practitioners and service users to share expertise, research evidence and care experiences. ExChange also provides free training to support the ongoing development of social care professionals by enriching skills that are foregrounded in the lived experience of care. ExChange is led by the Cascade Research Centre, which is based at Cardiff University and is funded by the Welsh Government through Health and Care Research Wales. And today's seminar is titled Assets, Strengths and Relationality, Integrating Approaches in Theory and Practice. And I have the pleasure today of introducing two speakers on this topic. Firstly, Jerry Tu, who's a professor of mental health and social work at Birmingham University. Thank you. Welcome, Jerry. And secondly, John Franklin, who's from Swansea Council Adult Services. And John is based in a local area coordination and implementation manager. And Jerry and John will speak each for about 20 minutes. And then we'll have time for a Q&A of approximately 15 minutes at the end of the session. So if you can post your questions into the chat, and I can then read out those at the end of the session. So I will hand over to Jerry, who's going to speak first, and I think he's going to share his screen to do that. And if I could just remind everybody to go on to mute to limit any feedback noise. Thank you very much. Over to you, Jerry.
Hello, I'm hoping this is all working, and I'm delighted to be invited to speak to you today. This topic is something that's quite close to my heart and interests at the moment. I have been doing research, a couple of research projects over the last few years, which has been giving me the chance to get close to practice and see, well, what's actually going on in some in local authorities that are really innovating in this area and trying to make sense of what is actually quite a complex field. And there are a lot of people that will tell you that they are doing strengths-based practice, but when you do the sort of follow-up question, right, give me a bit more detail, a bit more depth, you're thinking, I'm not quite sure whether I recognize this as strengths-based practice. So the purpose of my introductory 15 to 20 minutes is to start to try to put a few teeth into strengths-based practice, to give it a bit of a bite, so that we've got some sense of, we know what strengths-based practice is, and we know perhaps what it isn't. And in order to do that, it's helpful, I think, to relate it to other concepts like assets and relationality, which are all part of this rather crowded and slightly confusing space. So that's where I'm coming from. That's what I'm hoping to do. We're working. So, as I said, there's quite a lot of wooliness about strengths-based practice. And while there is that wooliness, we can't really answer some of these rather important questions about, are we actually doing it? Are we doing it well? And as there are a number of approaches that are moving into it, sort of being developed in this field, more ambitious local authorities are trying to combine them. Do they fit together? How easy is that? What are the wider contexts in which this sort of thing, is it not just a little bolt-on, it's something that is actually a bit more fundamental. So this is a slide borrowed from Lynn Romeo, who's the Chief Social Worker for Adults in England. And this gives a bit of a sense of actually how complicated it all is. There's not a nice little one phrase in the middle that sums it up. It's a bit of this and it's a bit of that. And I think that really does much more accurately reflect what strengths-based work is, rather than some simple one-liner that is a bit superficial. But that still leaves us with a relatively confused and confusing field. And these are some of the specific approaches that are already in this space, are being developed in this space for adult social care. And some of these you may be familiar with from other contexts, like family group conferencing has been around for quite a long time in relation to children and families work, but it is now starting to move over as a model of practice into adults work. And I believe in Wales, Ceredigion is one local authority that is starting to do that. If there's anybody from Ceredigion on the call and wants to ask a question or more likely give information to the wider field, that would be really interesting. So within these range of things, you've got open dialogue from mental health, which as far as I know isn't so far being developed in Wales, but is being a number of health trusts in the southeast of England and Devon are moving forward with an approach in mental health, which is, in mental health terms, completely radical. It's just about talking to people in a very strengths-based way, rather than medicating them to the eyeballs and expecting them to get better somehow. And it's also very strengths-based in terms of including the whole field, not just singling out one individual as the person and the problem. So, what are the underpinning principles that define the field of strength asset-based practice? And I'm turning first of all to restorative practice, which again is something that has developed very substantially within children and families work, but for reasons which I can't make any sense of, is not overtly an approach that is being used in work in adult social care. But I think certainly some aspects of it make enormous sense when we are looking at strength-based practice in adult social care. And those of you who are familiar with restorative practice will be familiar with the idea of there are basically 4 ways in which we can interact with people. And those 4 ways are defined by the degree of challenge that we are offering and the degree of support that we are offering. And if we're interacting with people in a way that is neither offering challenge nor offering support, we're probably not doing anything of any value or use to anybody. More commonly, we are in positions like the 2 or the 4 position, that we're either perhaps through safeguarding or other processes, we are essentially doing things to people and their families and their networks. We are making up our minds, we are making our judgments, we are imposing those on people, we are enforcing courses of action on people. That is the 2 position. It is highly challenging to, essentially in some way, we're probably saying things are going wrong here and we've got to sort it out for you. The other side of that is the 4 position, which is probably a very familiar traditional position in adult social care, that adult social care is about assessing people for services. It is about seeing what are your deficits, what can't you do, right? We'll do an assessment, we'll work out your eligibility, and either we can do something for you or we're back in the not position, no, we can't do anything for you. What restorative practice suggests is for effective engagement that actually makes a difference in people's lives and enables them to be part of making a difference in their lives, is that combination of challenge and support, the with position. And I think that that is absolutely core to any version of strength and assets-based practice. If it is actually, if it's for real, then it is about finding ways of combining that challenge and that support so that we are there with people. Taking this a bit further, if we are serious about asset and strength-based practice, we're actually undertaking a fundamental revisioning of the role of local services and the relationship between services, citizens and communities. The way that adult social care has been positioned, it very much looked like it was the to service, or it was the for service, or it was some combination of to and for. It never looked like it was the with service. So this is quite fundamental. It is how services appear, sell themselves to citizens and to communities, how they come down to people's levels, engage with the things that matter on the ground, and actually say, right, we're here to do things with you rather than doing things to or for you. What worries me at times is when services who tell me that they're doing strength-based practice, but it looks like one more of the list of models and methods and so on that social workers and practitioners are using. And the fundamental relationship between the service and the citizen and the family and the community, that hasn't changed. It's just another way. We're now doing strength-based practice to people, or we're now doing strength-based practice for people. Well, I think it's probably not strength-based practice. The second underpinning principle is that positive and holistic focus on what individuals, families and communities can do or could do with the right support and connectedness. It is whole person, whole family, whole community, whole lifetime. It's an antidote to the individualism that came very much with the NHS and Community Care Act of it assessing individuals for services. It's completely changing the context. And again, if we haven't got that really big holistic context, I think we're probably not doing strength-based practice. Now, some people are very wary of strength-based practice on the grounds that it is all saying everything in the garden is rosy and we're only interested in hearing about your abilities and your aspirations, and we're not remotely interested in the fact that your life is absolutely terrible at the moment, that you've been through trauma, and all of that sort of thing. And it's somehow a way of whitewashing situations that are bleak, desolate, difficult, challenging, and so on. So I think we have to have that absolutely clear, that strength-based practice isn't about looking away from those things, but it is about a way of engaging with serious issues like social exclusion, the impact of trauma, poverty, and so on, but with engaging with those in the with position, which is about how do we both acknowledge but then move on from those horrendous experiences and barriers that may massively, certainly at the start of the engagement, massively reduce the opportunities that people think are available to them. So written in that sort of way, I think strength-based practice looks quite radical. It's not just another version of more of the same. Now, the next thing I want to do is to start to make sense of the different layers and levels of this field. And I think that there are three overlapping things that some people give more emphasis to one or to another or to another. But I think if we're going to be effective, we have to take all of these three layers seriously. And if you start with what is most conventionally described as strength-based practice, that tends to be about engaging with individuals in creative, purposeful conversations about what would be a good life and how to achieve this. And some of you may be familiar with the 3 conversations model, which is probably the most commonly adopted at the moment way of doing that. And those conversations are also aiming to go beyond just the conversation, but also to link people to resources and opportunities and people and so on. So although it starts at that level, it actually links to relationality and assets. It's not something on its own. The bit in the middle, the glue, is relationality. And I think that this is a crucial level, and something that we can, historically, we've been very good in adult social care at looking at individuals. A bit more historically, we were very good at working with communities. Sometimes we weren't very good at actually looking at what goes on between individuals and communities. And I think it's really important to have a focus on the layers of relationships that are important to people, those who are in intimate relationships with us, those that are part of our wider care, support, activity, aspiration network, people who may be important to us in when we've got problems and issues and helping us to resolve them. So there are frameworks like restorative practice that give us a way of understanding how to do relationships and how to enable others to do relationships differently. There are also approaches like family group conferencing, which provide a way of doing this, which gives both mobilizes the network and gives the network power to make decisions, make plans, take things forward. And then thirdly, there's a focus on assets, which tends to come more from a community engagement perspective, starting with the community and then supporting individuals and families within the context of that community. And often the communities in which people that we are concerned about are living are communities that themselves are quite depleted in terms of their resources. There was a sort of naivety back in the days of the big society in the noughties that all that we had to do was to liberate people to do stuff in communities, and the state could just sort of walk away, it would all happen. This was happening at the same time that a lot of the local grassroots organisation were having their funding taken away, and the whole infrastructure of communities being able to support people and take things forward and achieve things and so on, that was very much under threat. So I would propose that we need to, whatever we do, we need to take account of all three of these layers or levels. But what tends to happen is that particular approaches that we look at have more of a focus on one of those than the other two. And if the goal is to bring about that more fundamental change in the way that citizens and families are related to by services, then probably just tinkering with one of those rather than all three, we're probably not going to achieve as much of a change in fundamentals as we might wish to do. So if we are going to integrate across these levels, we need to have some coherence. And I think the first coherence is around values, and I'll come on to that in a bit more detail, what I would call a different sort of professionalism. We need to have some clarity about what is our common purpose. What sorts of changes are we seeking to enable people to make in their lives? And within that, I would suggest that it is a shift from maintenance, which was very much the approach of the Community Care Act. What is the level of need that we're prepared to top you up with, and then you can lead a life which is 4 care visits a day, and that's good enough, rather than what actually is flourishing to you, rather than what is maintenance. We need to get under the surface and have some theoretical clarity, or else we are rather sort of stumbling in the dark. What are the mechanisms of effective engagement, and what factors enable positive outcomes? And we need to have that ability to see beyond the individual and engage with the context, social context of people's lives. So if we're going to have this different sort of professionalism, what does it look like? And the first thing that it looks like is, and this is something that agencies are very scared about, is devolving power. And actually devolving power from structures that have become very used to holding power at the very senior level, and devolving it in a very prescriptive sort of way. You can have a little bit of power to do this, but you've got to fill in this form to do that, and so on, which is anathema if you're actually going to be working with people in a way that is challenging and supportive and creative. Co-production requires the power to come up with your own solutions in your own way. It involves the removal of a whole layer of bureaucracy and proceduralism, and it involves doing with rather than doing to, as I said before. Our little quote here from Heather, who's an ambassador for Shared Lives, and from her lived experience, she was talking about what made a difference to her in terms of professionalism. And what made a difference to her was that sense that a person that, or people that she was working with, had that sense of their hands are never tied. They weren't just bureaucrats following procedures. They were there to be with and come up with a solution. So from the lived experience side, that is a really good litmus test. Does it look like the person you're working with? Are their hands tied or their hands never tied? So into the world of theory very quickly. And some of you may be familiar with the work of Amartya Sen, who's a Indian development economist who's been very influential on an international scale in terms of what actually makes a difference to a developing country. Is it gross domestic product? No, it's actually the things that matter to people. How do we start to quantify and conceptualize the things that matter to people? You ask them. And out of that comes the notion of capability. And the capability is about what is that people can do, be, and achieve that is valuable to them. What are the choices, whether or not they actually take them up at this particular point of time, but knowing that that choice, that opportunity is there. So this is a way of looking at something that in the broader scheme of things we might be calling well-being, but it's not talking about well-being as a little quantum of happiness. It is talking about well-being as a kind of power. It's a kind of power of our own, over our own lives, which enables us to flourish in the way we want to flourish. So starting with that idea of capability, I've been originally in the mental health context, but I think it applies more widely, developing the idea of capitals as a more specific way of looking at the sort of things that make a difference to people, that enable them to get control of their lives in the way that they want to have control. And that, I will not go into it in detail because I haven't got the time, but that goes right from the economic capital, the wider resources, the social connections or lack of them, but also includes things like identity, which people, when you actually talk to them, matters so much that people can get given identities as psychiatric patients, as schizophrenics, as older people, and the identity as an older person is one of, I have lived my life, I have nothing more to offer, I am a burden, and so on. So all sorts of issues around identity can be so important, and we don't often talk about them. Relationships we've been talking about a lot, and personal capital. People have a lot of ingenuity and coping strategies and so on, that if we find out about that, we've got a sense of what their resources are. So having that sort of focus helps us to think broad and also identify, well, what are the barriers to people getting to where they want to get to? Is it economic? Is it social? Is it identity? Is it relationship? Is it personal? Is it all of these things? But it certainly keeps the focus well away from always assuming that it's a personal and it's the individual that is somehow the deficit, the problem that prevents their having the life that they want. So power is important, and power is not a zero-sum game. People are very frightened that if you hand over power to them, then they're suddenly going to go mad with it and it's all going to go out of control and that sort of thing. So what we're looking at here is something a bit more subtle, where people have less subjection to the power of others, including organizations, having power over them, and more opportunities for them to develop their own efficacy and to mobilize cooperative power and protective power together. Again, I could go into this in more detail, but I think it's really important to see power as something that's potentially positive and fluid, and people can use both individually, but very often collectively to their advantage. So the core ideas that I invite you to take forward for strength-based practice are, firstly, the need to focus on strengths, relationships, and assets, all of those three levels. That it's about enabling new forms of connection between individuals, families, and communities that build or sustain capabilities, and all of those forms of capital where they are relevant. And this is about the shift of power and resources to citizens, families, and communities, so as to enable people to find solutions to their difficulties and maximize their capabilities. How do we put this into practice? And this is where I'm going to put John on the spot. And local area coordination is an approach which he will explain. And when I first came across local area coordination, I'd sort of rather, I think, incorrectly put it in the assets box. That was very much about working informally with local people, local resources, and so on to build assets. And the more I've talked to people who actually do local area coordination, including John, the more I realise it is an approach which actually rather neatly goes across all three. So enough of me, and over to John.
Thank you very much, Jerry. Excellent. That's a really set up very, very well for John to come in and talk about his experiences. So over to you, John, for the next 20 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. So, thanks, Jerry. And yeah, that was really helpful and interesting. And I think it's incredibly helpful to have some academics looking at and explaining some of the background around and the real deep thinking around strength-based working. It really helps us who are essentially practitioners. We think that it's the right way to do it, and we get on and do it. But it's really great to have some people who can think a bit more deeply about it, about some of the theory behind it, and really put some meat into it. So that was really helpful. Thanks. So yeah, my name is John Franklin. I manage a team of local area coordinators across Swansea County, South Wales. I've got with me actually in the call some colleagues. So Claire, who is one of my assistant managers, is here as well. So I'm hoping that she's going to jump in when I say something stupid or run out of gas. And I know also, I think there's a couple of colleagues, actually real local area coordinators, who are on the call as well. So I'm hoping that they'll, if they want to, they can actually give some real life examples of what they do. But so just to explain, and I'm not going to talk for a long time. So I think it's what really the benefit of these is to have conversation going and get some questions and really to dig into what it is that the people who've come to listen, want to find out. So, but I will just take a few minutes just talking about local area coordination. It's an approach to working with people in the communities that's been around for around 30 years. So it's not something new. It was initiated in Western Australia, in the outback, as a way of helping people with physical disabilities to support each other and to get access when potentially the nearest support group was thousands and thousands of miles away. And it's been developed and grown over the decades, and it's been proven to work. So there's around 14 academic evaluations that have been carried out for local area coordination sites across the UK, and they each show pretty much the same thing, the same impact that local area coordination is having. So there are around 14 different sites in the UK that operate local area coordination. We're part of a national network, and essentially the vision for local area coordination is that all people live in welcoming communities that provide friendship and mutual support, equity and opportunities for everyone. So straight away, the vision is much bigger than just guiding people or directing people or signposting people to support groups that might help them in their communities, or just getting to know them and trying to help identify what their needs might be. It's very much a big vision around changing the way, as Jerry very much touched on, changing the way that our communities work, and ensuring that people are able to live in communities using their gifts and their abilities and their talents and opportunities. So the way that we do that, and look, it's what the network calls the Local Area Coordination Charter, is to develop partnerships with individuals and families as they build and pursue their goals and dreams for a good life, and also to do the same thing with local communities to strengthen their capacity to welcome, include, and support all people as valued, contributing citizens. And that last little bit is really key. It's really important for me personally about the essence of contribution. It's not something that when we work when all the statutory organisations work with people in the communities, recognising that they can have they have an ability to make a contribution themselves is very much overlooked. And so when we talk with people in our communities about what it is they may be able to contribute, it's not something often that they can necessarily identify immediately, because especially if they've been engaged with statutory organisations for a long time, it's never a question that they've been asked. So in Swansea, we have 23 local area coordinators. Each coordinator works in a specific population size area. So between 10 and 12,000 is the ideal and population size. And sometimes we've got slightly bigger areas than that, but essentially that's the size. And so they match our ward boundaries approximately. Sometimes they go over ward boundaries, but we try and make them work so that they work with communities that work with each other. And often we don't know how well communities will work with each other until we've started working with them. But each coordinator works in a population size of around 10 to 12,000 people, and they work in the communities. They're not based in an office. They're not based in one place particularly. They're encouraged when they first start to get out into their communities, to become known and to get to know people. And they'll very often find what we might call bumping places. So that could be something like a community centre or a library, but very often it's other places that are a little bit more subtle, like the hairdressers who get to know everyone in their communities, and the post office staff who have people coming to them asking them to open their post because they're not able to do it themselves necessarily. And it could be other places in their community. So they'll find bumping places where they will meet with people. And I guess the basis for local area coordination is very much about building relationships. So it is, as Jerry said, it does cross all three. It is about strengths and assets, but ultimately it's about building relationships. And one of the benefits of the role is that we don't have a time, there's a time pressure for us to work with people. We're not limited to 6 visits and then we have to unload you and send you off to somebody else. We're not limited to how many times we can meet somebody, and it's entirely down to the individual when they want to engage and for how long they want to engage. And the local area coordinator is essentially what we would call an alongsider. So we walk alongside people to help them identify and achieve what it is that they want to achieve to get their idea of a good life. Changing the questions, I think Jerry touched on this, is changing the question from the statutory question, which is what's wrong with you and how can we fix you, which is the doing to bit, to a question around what matters to you and how can we help you achieve that. And so the relationship is really important, because as we walk alongside people, we want to build their trust and understand more about their lives, and we can't do that. There's no shortcut to getting to know somebody. It takes time to do that, and it may take visits, having cups of tea and talking with people and meeting with them to get to know them and to get to identify what it is that actually is in their lives they want to work on at that particular time. And of course that may not be the particular issue that they came to us about in the first place. There might be something else that we uncover as we walk through that and build that relationship with people. And as the coordinator gets to know the person and builds that relationship, then they're able to find out that there are potentially things in their life that they would like to work on, that the coordinator will walk alongside them, but also there may be things in their lives that actually they either were aware of and aren't acting on now, or maybe weren't aware of, and those could be gifts and skills. So to give you an example, we write lots of stories about the people that we work with. And one story which I always remember is an elderly gentleman who was in his mid-80s and had been looking after his wife because she suffered from dementia. He'd been looking after her for a significant period of time. When she went into a home, because she was too ill to stay in the family home and was cared for, he was left on his own and started to really struggle mentally. So he went to the GP thinking he was having a nervous breakdown, wanted some support from the GP. Unfortunately, the GP knew that there was a local area coordinator in the area. So rather than handing him some medicine, he introduced it to the local area coordinator. The local area coordinator took time to get to know him. Over a period of months, discovered that this chap actually once had written poetry. He was a poet, but he hadn't written any for years because he'd been looking after his wife. Didn't feel very creative as he was in this really difficult situation. So local area coordinator connected him with a group of other poets in the area, made a connection with some other people who encouraged him. Over a period of time, he started rewriting poetry again and was able to change that part of his life. So he actually became much more positive, was able to give his poetry at the groups, and eventually, to cut a very long story short, was able to publish a book on World War I poetry. The local MP was involved in launching it, and at that point, his life had improved to the point that he was able to to write his poetry and connect with other people. I had friends and people who were interested. Now, again, as Jerry said, that doesn't mean that the rest of his life was perfect. This doesn't cancel out all the other health issues that he had and all the other concerns and things that he had. But actually, though, recognised that there was a strength and a gift and an asset in his life that the local area coordinator was able to recognise. And the only way to do that was by spending that time with him. So the relationship is super important. That long-term view of having a relationship with somebody that takes over time, recognising that somebody has got a skill. And I guess that starts from a point of recognising that we've all got skills and assets and gifts. They're in all of us, and actually it just takes someone to walk alongside somebody else to help them have the confidence to grow in that. So that's one example, and we've got lots of others, and I know some of my colleagues on the call have got lab examples of that as well. But it's very much about walking alongside our coordinators of skilled generalists. They're not experts in one particular field, but they are skilled in talking to people, in building relationships, and finding creative ways to help those relationships move forward. And one of the really important things for us is not only the working with the individual and the community, but also the reforming agenda that the local area coordination has, which again is something that Jerry touched on, which is trying to shift the power from organisations to people and to communities. And one of the really key ways that we saw that happen was during lockdown, when we had where there were lots of formal third sector volunteering going on, but our coordinators, who had to shift their role from a really preventative one, which is primarily what we're about, to a more crisis one, we were helping to facilitate lots and lots of informal support, and the way that communities came together and neighbours came together, lots of hyper-local neighbour-to-neighbour support, where people were just helping each other and not necessarily signing up formally, but were able to bring to support. And not just individuals, but communities came together, and lots of creative things came out of that. There were some incredible stories of the way that the small communities have come together, and the gifts and the skills in those communities were able to maximise what was happening in their community, support each other, but also celebrate some of the really good things that were going on as well. And just the fact that we were able to trust those people to get on and do that showed that if we are able to, because it's not a zero-sum game, we're not going to lose anything by handing over some of this power and resources to our communities, because actually they're the experts. They know what they need and what's best for them, and a lot of them have got the skills and gifts to be able to do that without needing an organisation to manage it for them. take a pause there and see. I know with Claire, who's on the call, wants to say anything. I think the most important thing for us is about this changing the question from what's wrong with you? How can we mend you? Which is appropriate in some situations, but when we're working alongside individuals and communities, it's much more about this what matters question, which is happening more and more, and we see that question being asked by other colleagues and other organisations. But it is a mixture that walking alongside the relationality, which is really important, and then recognising the strengths and the assets that are in the community. That relationship really is the glue, as Jerry was saying. Yeah, so this is a network diagram which explains our kind of our journey of conversation and relationship with people. And the first part I point out is number 8, where it says where the pound sign is and where it says services, which is a place that statutory services start in a conversation. They'll start with a question: what's wrong with you? Do you fit the criteria? Have we got enough budget to support you in a particular way? But for us, that conversation comes right to the very end, and it is an important one because some people we work with may well need some kind of formal support, which needs some funding, which is fine, but it comes at the end of the conversation. So it's very much about, firstly, talking about people's vision for a good life, and we may not necessarily use those exact words. It's about saying to people, what's a good life look like to you? What is it that you'd like to achieve, and how can we help you walk alongside that? Secondly, it's about recognising that people and communities do have strengths, and maybe helping to them to realise what some of those are, or to helping to dig into their lives and help them to recognise what they are. It's certainly about giving information, but it's not just about giving information. So we're not information and guidance. Just giving people information and guidance and leaving it at that. It's not strength-based work. It's just signposting to something that already exists. But certainly people do need information. Fourthly, it's about networks and talking about helping them to talk about what networks they've already got. Who have they got around them? Who are the professionals, family, friends, people in their street, and what kind of networks would they like to develop? Fifthly, it's about helping people to have a voice, and we're not advocates for. So again, it's this walking alongside idea of helping them to do what it is that they feel they need to, and helping them to have a voice. Particularly, it's about taking action, and that could be anything from like talking about the poet taking some action and writing some poetry and going to a poetry group, but it could be something very simple like being able to walk your child to the school because you're overcoming some anxiety around that, and we've got stories of people in similar situations. Seventhly, it's about ensuring people are connected with their community and finding out what else is happening in their community and introducing them. And sometimes it is as simple as introducing two people who can help each other. So I was talking with one of my colleagues this morning. She's working with a lady who's got some very significant health issues, needed something moving in her house, and rather than the potential would be for her to pay somebody to come and move it, or if there was a third sector organisation, we might have booked them to come and do something, but she was able to connect them with someone who lived down the road who was able to come and do that for them. Just a very simple community connection. And then lastly, it's about looking at services and seeing if people do actually need those. But that's something that comes as a backup to all these other local, low cost solutions that we can help people identify. Thank you very much for that. And I'll stop talking and hand back to you, Sarah, or Claire, if you want to add anything, or any of my colleagues on the call.
Excellent. Thank you very much, John. That was really, really insightful. And I was going to pass on to the questions to start with, but I don't know if anybody from your team, John, wants to say anything. I don't want to force anybody to say anything if they don't want to. Maybe it'll just organically develop as we talk about it. Okay, so the first question was posted, thank you very much, from Sharon Colville-Jones, who has asked the question of how do we align this essential service at a time of extreme disengagement with the outside world during COVID, and with a sense of a depleted internal assets. So I think John sort of touched on this briefly, didn't you, John, where I guess COVID has been both a challenge and to some extent an opportunity in terms of realising some of our community strengths and assets. But it also very much talks to Jerry's points, I think, about some of these broader contextual features that are needed. So I don't know if both of you want to answer this question. John, do you want to say anything? Do you want to say more about COVID or anybody that you've worked with during this really difficult time?
Yeah, so I think certainly through COVID, it was very interesting in that the team really needed to change the way they worked, and I think we struggled with that because we were moving from a prevention focus, working with people's strengths, to very much to managing some crisis situations and people needing food and prescriptions collected, and people who were finished. So we shifted, and we're unfortunately we're where we're shifting back again much more to how we should be working. But I do think that despite that, we discovered that there was the opportunity for those incredible strengths in the community and the community spirit, which we're able to facilitate in many ways. And that informal volunteering was incredibly powerful. I think we had something like 20,000 different requests for support. 2,500 people who just stood up and said, "Yeah, I'm happy to help my neighbour," and lots of really amazing stories about how people who lived in the same street for 20 years, because they were asked to go and do a job for somebody, then made a connection and then realised that they liked each other and have now carried on being friends and carried on that connection. So I think I think we are finding, and my colleagues would be better placed to answer this. I think we are finding people who are scared about re-engaging in community, people who are concerned. There's a nervousness about going back out into communities and getting to know people again. But I think our desire for connection and our need for connection as human beings can often override that. And I think as we're working with people, we're helping the team are definitely helping people to make those connections in a gentle way.
Excellent, thank you, John. Claire, did you want to say something around that as well?
Yeah, just to add to, I guess, as well as people being aware of some of the risks and being nervous, I guess, and with some of the challenges of engaging, I think lots of people that I've spoken to are more ready than maybe they've ever been to engage and to step out and to do new challenges, because I think they've sat at home for the last 2 years and they've had that space to think, actually, I want my life to be different and I'd like to try something different. And now they're ready to step out and they're looking for people that they can connect to in a way that maybe they weren't ready to pre-COVID.
Excellent, thank you very much, Claire. Jerry, do you want to say something around that issue as well?
I mean, this is very impressionistic rather than based on thorough academic research, but from the local authorities that I've been working with in my current research project, which wasn't supposed to be about COVID at all, but then COVID happened, and so it's become much more about understanding the ways that local authorities and communities responded to the challenges of COVID. So I think there have been sort of 3 phases to this. That there was a first phase during the initial lockdown where very, very suddenly the conventional local authority social care services rolled back. Day centres shut, if day centres existed. The field-based social workers and social care practitioners couldn't go out and meet people. And this could have been an utter disaster. And it was, for some people, it wasn't a disaster. I don't want to gloss over that. But also what happened hugely was the sort of thing that John was talking about. And in Birmingham, there's a different model from local area coordination. They had already had this infrastructure where in each constituency there was a third sector organisation that was committed to be a neighbourhood development overseer, but then they work with lots of micro organizations in the community, so they had that ability not just to be, so it wasn't just the big voluntaries or whatever, it was local street level stuff, so that when we suddenly had this crisis, they had the resource, they knew the people, they could connect people and so on. So there was this massive handover of power in a very positive way. And actually, let's scrap all the bureaucracy, let's just give these people the resources that they need to do to get out there and do what needs to be done. And as I say, there would be some who really missed something that was really important, but a lot of opportunities and connections were created. And there was a lot of energy at that time. And there was also a lot of energy on the local authority side, that they were realizing we've got to do things very differently, very suddenly, and let's see how this works and so on. Then I would say phase 2 was getting very weary, and both that was people in organizations and citizens, everybody had worked so bloody hard under very difficult conditions and so on. And there was just a weariness, and that sense of creativity and being innovative tended to sort of wither in quite a lot of places and at different sort of levels. And I think we're now in phase 3, which is what Claire was, I think, alluding to, is that sense of people starting to come out again to play, and they're having meetings with people at different sorts of levels where, yes, this feels like a chance to regroup and rethink and get back to, well, what was all this strength and assets-based stuff before it became crisis management? Just as John was saying, it's going back to, right, what's our core mission? What's our roots? What are our values? And how can we actually capitalize on particularly phase 1 of the COVID response? Well, in many ways, we got things right.
Excellent. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, John. And thank you, Sharon, for that question. It really was a great start off. Meryl Williams has also put a question in the chat, which asks how the local area coordinators work alongside social workers. So that, I guess that's mainly towards you, John. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. And I'll just put a quick answer in the chat, but just to expand, Matt, we work really well with social workers. We spent so local area coordination has been running in Swansea for just over 6 years. I was one of the first local area coordination coordinators here, and we spent a long time talking and explaining our role with social workers. We still do that, but we work really well with them, and very often social workers will be able to introduce people. We take introductions rather than referrals, which is an important aspect. Language is really powerful. And so we try and use language that reflects what we do, rather than language which we don't describe people as service users, for example. We don't take referrals, we take introductions, which much talks about or reflects the balance of power in that relationship much better. We're not referrers. Referrers suggest that an expert is referring somebody to another expert. But an introduction much more reflects how we work. So with our social workers, there's very often people that they will see who don't fit criteria for support, and they recognise that actually they may well be people that we can help with. I would say potentially, it's ideal for people to be introduced to us much earlier than when they become known to a social worker, because we can work with people in that preventative way for longer. But I think we've got a good relationship with social workers here, and they understand more about what we do, and it works properly.
Could I come in quickly on the back of that? Go back to that quote from Heather, Shared Lives Ambassador, of "Your hands are never tied." And I think that is the crux. I've seen in some local authorities the sort of thing that John has described working really well. I've also seen in other local authorities it not working. And that was because the social workers felt that their hands were still tied. They were part of a of a bureaucracy which actually meant that they couldn't necessarily do the right thing. They couldn't actually do the, I don't even know what the right thing is. And actually it is all about getting in that messy bit and finding out what people are really at, and solutions may come out of somewhere that's left field and everything else. So I think it is not uniform, and where I think it works really well is if there is that shared sense that both social workers and local area coordinators can be creative, can actually look at each individual situation on its merits and come up with, ooh, shall we try that? What might work here, and so on, rather than, well, this is a sausage machine and either this person fits the sausage machine or they don't fit the sausage machine. And if they don't fit the sausage machine, then you have this very awkward conversation between local area coordinator and social worker, where they're really in different universes, because there isn't that join up, that integration across the local authority, that real commitment to a different way of engaging with citizens across the piece.
Excellent, thank you, Jerry, and thanks for Carmano, who put in the chat as well, a really positive personal experience of a strengths-based approach. It's really great to hear, and I think that sums up brilliantly actually the session, because I think both John and Jerry have really shone a vivid light on the assets-based approach, the strengths-based approach to social care, looking at both the kind of academic approach as well as the practitioner, and I think really develops some insightful key features and questions, and also critical questions as well, not being uncritical about the challenges, which I think is really important to appreciate and acknowledge. And so I think an excellent start to the seminar series. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. So thank you ever so much for your participation and your work today, and for all the questions and comments in the chat from everybody else who's joined us. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you very much. Stay well, everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right.